I was so angry, especially after the election. I was just livid. And then I realized I need some allies. I mean, as much as I want to yell at people, I need to like be like, hi, right. Can you help me out here? And even, dare I say it, white men who are allies. I think, I know. I said it, I know.
No, I'm gonna say I don't want allies, I want accomplices.
Like, be active, don't be an observer.
Yes.
So I've said that to multiple people. Please do not be a bystander. We do not need bystanders. We don't need observers, because that's how we got here.
Right. I think white men can absolutely be accomplices. I think white men can absolutely, and really absolutely should be stepping up right now, right? As should, and this is like, spotlight on you, but as should white women in terms of speaking to each other about what's happening in their situations, and what, you know, your friend who voted for Cheeto McTinypaws had to say. I'm not using that name. You're just going to deal.
No, it's just not even.
Right. I make it my mission not to make those kind of people happy about what I've said.
Yeah.
But I think that when we're talking about having allies, I personally don't need you to be nice to me, especially to
I don't
get
care
me
if you
help
like
you.
me. Yeah,
right.
I don't care if you like me.
Right. Like if you call me, you're like, I need help. I'm going to be like, okay, well, with what? You know, because sometimes we just don't have time and patience for anybody's feelings or ego, and so that's why I was just like, allies maybe, accomplices for sure.
As someone who's worked in education for a long time, I know that I've come to a like embracing of like whatever gets you there. You know, if it's because your next door neighbor sewed you a pink hat and is like, what are you doing Saturday? You just broke up with your boyfriend, come to brunch with me and then to this march, and it gets you woke. You know, that I do think it's important to allow people to get there, even who have been absent.
I grew up sort of feminist, but not book feminist. My grandmother was a woman who worked, my aunt, my cousin, everyone worked, right? And so I grew up leaning probably a little more womanist than feminist.
When I started at DePaul, which I'm glad that I ended up going there, I ended up founding a women's newspaper that quarter called Voices, specifically to address the issues that DePaul University's paper would not address. And that's when I also learned the term feminist. And it's not a term, like many of you had expressed before, that my family would use, because no one in my family uses the term feminist to identify that way. But I realized that feminism is about your positionality and how you act in society, right? And so I realized, like, wow, my aunts, my grandmother, my mom, they are all feminists, even if they don't identify that way. But because I have access to this language, I felt it important to identify that way, and I'm not anyone who ever shies away from using the term.
For me, it's like what you're saying. Like, my mother worked, my aunt, her sister worked. They're both physicians, but my grandmother, I don't actually know her level of education because she died in childbirth.
Awful.
And so I never knew her. Like, the people that were sort of my, immediate, sort of like this generation there's been such a huge leap to go from married at 10 or dying in childbirth to my mother being a physician and then having 5 daughters that had made very different choices. And so I came to feminism early, whether I knew it or not. I feel like I was like a 6-year-old feminist.
I mean, I remember hearing the word feminist in one of my first classes in undergrad and being like, oh, that's what I am. Like, other people, books, like people write books about it. They're taught like the, and you're like, this light goes off. But I really, like, when I really started feeling like the word like speaks to me, it was like, it was just like empowering. It was just like, for me, it was really like, and there's a community for me,
I want to say 93, and someone's going to tell me I've got my dates wrong, but whatever. Kimberly Crenshaw coins the term. She's a black woman. She's using it to describe challenges black women face in the legal justice system because of their identity and the way those identities intersect. It has since expanded and been adopted, and in some cases co-opted by others, to talk about the ways in which feminism can serve or has failed to serve varying communities underneath this broad umbrella. I tend towards an intersectional feminist lens when I am talking about feminism. I am an occasional feminist, so I'm going to plug in here the idea that there's a space for a variety of feminisms underneath an umbrella, and intersectional feminism is really sort of a hopeful meeting ground place where the different interests and needs can come together.
I would add on to that too, just in the especially in like the realm of like say academia and education, sometimes with my students to give a general idea about just intersections and how the nuances of different life experiences in race, class, privilege, comedy versus print writing. Even there's a lot of spaces where the influence of one can dominate the influence of another, and you have to negotiate that differently depending on the identity you inhabit. And as you said, like it began in this race dialogue, but has since sort of opened up to just pointing out that, you know, the intersection means this is being affected by this, and so on and so on. And we have to continue to explore these every time we have a conversation about something that's intersectional, which is basically like everything in life.
Yeah, I think there's also an understanding now, what does a feminist look like and sound like, and what does a feminist do, just sort of speaking to that. As someone who's was raised Muslim and is, you know, does not cover my hair, it's one of those things where like, are you really a Muslim? Are you really practicing? Is there something about your the Islam that you adhere to that's different? And so I feel like that is something as you know, a woman of color, as a Muslim, as someone who has always, I've never shied away from the feminist label, but I've seen how I show up and there isn't really a place for me. And so that's, I think, it's almost like, okay, we failed somehow to bring in a variety of voices, so let's make sure that we're not doing that we're creating a more broad base and a more inclusive. I think inclusion is one of the most important, I think, aspects to the concept of intersectionality.
When I teach feminism, I tell my students feminism was not something that white women made. It's something that indigenous and black women, women of color gave white women. Because if we look at the history of the work that black women have done, the work that indigenous women have done, and you look at the politic that they engage in, right? Eradicating and abolishing slavery, abolishing different oppressions of like women not being able to work and get paid, those are all things that women of color have always championed, right? Like the fact that white women had particular access to introduce the term in a particular way and to advance it is different. But I always tell them it's important to know that this is not something that white women handed us. It's something that has always been in us and that we've always been doing. So.
That's really beautiful.